A lovely garden can bring more than visual or spiritual pleasure. It can provide a platform for cultural exchange. At the International Horticultural Expo in Beijing, gardeners, landscapers and visitors from around the world continue to flow into the 162-day event. Yet the expo isn't just a shop window for a magnificent range of Chinese and foreign gardens. Behind the scenes, experts in garden artistry and landscape design are swapping fresh ideas and sometimes blending elements of East and West. So how do Chinese and foreign gardening styles influence each other? And how can landscaping enable us to live green and better in the modern world? I was joined by Hartmann, a landscape architect for the RhineScheme design company in Beijing, and Wenzhe, director of the Beijing Expo's Botanic garden project. I started by asking Hartmann about his gardening inspirations.
I think it's actually a little bit longer time ago. It's a garden expo in Munich, 2005, and it was placed on an old airport. And how the designers actually put this airport layer into the design means they kept the airstrip and put this into design impressed me very much. Mm-hmm. So I think this is something I also always want to do, to put actually existing elements into a new design.
Yeah. Wenzhe, is that also something that you try to do, or landscape artists or botanic garden managers, especially during this horticultural expo, is to take elements in our life and play cleverly with it and bring a touch of fun, of green to it?
Yes. I think this time we try to have a sculpture that we met the sculpture designer in the Chelsea garden, and we invited him to design the Molly and her family on the rooftop of the Botanic garden. So I think it's interesting to see like different design and different projects that happen to be like put together in the same project.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So you mentioned the Chelsea garden, Chelsea flower show.
Yes.
Tell us a little bit about it, and how has that inspired you, and how do you observe the difference between that show and the expo that's been going on?
Okay, so I think it's interesting at the very beginning because my boss and my colleagues went to London for the Chelsea show. The Chelsea show happened like annually, and so like every year it had in London. But for the expo, it happened every 7 years in different cities, like in Chiang Mai, Qingdao, and like different cities. I think for the scale-wise, the expo is more like bigger, and it has like 4 major pavilions inside it. But for the parks in the Chelsea Flower Show, it's more like small scale and in the open air. Like usually there's a theme for the park. For example, there's like Rose Park, so like all the plants there are about rose, and the products there are rose relative. Mm. And for example, the driftwood sculpture, like what I just said, the Molly and her family, like all in that park are about the driftwood sculptures.
What kind of inspiration have your team gotten from the Chelsea Flower Show that has been incorporated in your design in the Botanic Garden?
I think we inspired from both the design way and the operation way. For the design way, we invite some designers from the Chelsea Flower Show, and we got the, how to say, like the way they put for the pavement, the way they put for the plants, and the way how they incorporate like different plants together. Mm. This is for the design part. Mm-hmm. And for the operation part, it's very interesting that we have the like ice cream trunks, the beer trunks, okay, and all the snacks for the visitors and tourists, which is really popular in Expo now. Like when tourists come during the summer, they'd really like ice cream.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, it's also kind of surprising if you hadn't had that kind of idea, right?
Yes.
But anyway, in terms of gardening itself, in terms of coming up with the unique landscape or horticultural display, what kind of elements do you take from your culture, the Chinese culture, or your culture, the German or the European culture, and combine it to make it truly unique and modern at the same time, Chris?
Yeah, this is a wide field. I think Western design is very much based on rational things and on ecological things. So when you go back to the past, for example, yeah, then you can see that Chinese landscape architecture comes from a feeling about nature and expressed in a beautiful landscape garden, emphasized very much on the beauty of nature, while the Western garden was identified by conquering the nature. This means the abundance and the wilderness of the nature was pressed into regular shapes, like for example the Baroque gardens. No? So, and this is the background. So when I am asked now what I'm doing in China and how do I transport my Western culture into the Chinese design, then it's I think basically two things. The first thing is to emphasize very much on ecological things, to bring gardens into a context, into a bigger context, not a garden for itself, but a garden in terms of how can the garden contribute to environmental improvement. And the second thing is simply also these regular things. So I'm also trained on putting the things into a very simple shape, but on the other hand make it very open, very multifunctional. So these two things, they're coming together and are mixed then with the demands in China, with the Chinese clients' background and all these kind of things.
Straddling two different cultures, what do you find, and to you as well, Wenjie, what is the most challenging thing to do? I mean, you talk about the Chinese concept of a landscape is to keep it as natural as possible, although it is cultivated, right? It's a garden, it's a man-made garden, but we would like to preserve the most natural aspect of it. But then if you look at the Versailles, for instance, where the trees are all shaped into a certain shape and they think that is the way nature is. But of course I understand in the Western gardening culture you also have this philosophy of having it in a very uncultivated way, although it is a cultivated garden. So what is the biggest challenge, Wenjie, when it comes to your job of bringing horticultural culture to the Chinese, you know, showcasing different culture and educating the Chinese public at the same time?
Well, I think like for this time, the horticulture exhibition, that we do not have the gardening itself, but also the operation, that we try to educate people about all the theories and knowledge behind it, right? So we are trying to combine both the Chinese culture gardening thing and the Western culture, the Western gardens together. So for example, Liuyuan is a very famous Chinese garden in Suzhou. So there are 12 vistas in Liuyuan, and people cannot see all of the vistas together at once. So we try to, because the concept of the design is called 一步一景, one step, one vista. So when you stand on the point 1, you cannot see the point 2. After you have to go after a curve and very natural way to see this point 2.
What's the philosophy? What's the philosophy of the Chinese of kind of almost being evasive, right? I don't want you to see everything at the same time. I want you to explore, right? How is that? How do you copy that? How do you take that and put it on display in the garden?
Yes. So this time we divide our greenhouse into 5 different parts. And we connect these different parts with like a zigzag, a very natural way, like between the park, instead of like a Western garden that when you stand in the middle you can see all the grand park around you, right? So we try to put the Western garden plants and some Western garden furnitures in the greenhouse, but we're using a Chinese way to connect them together to make it more like secret. And like a maze when you go around in it.
How difficult it is for us as ordinary person to use gardening culture or to use landscape architectural skills, let's say, not as a grand discipline, to enrich our modern life?
Yeah.
On a daily basis, is that possible?
Yeah, I would maybe say it in a different way. I think the daily life or the way the people live together identifies our landscape architecture, because I'm not a landscape architect who works in a bubble. No? I'm constantly reflecting and need to absorb the streams in the society or in the community, and there are so many different kind of needs, and these needs very much identify and guide my design.
Would you give an example, for instance?
Yeah, no, for example, no, one client, he thinks he wants to have something about wine culture, for example, no, about wine culture. So I maybe never had anything to do with wine culture, so I need to get used to and get into this topic and discuss constantly with the client or with some scientists or some people who grow the wine. And this all guides my design. And there's only one part is then my own design, my spirit which I put into it, but there's so much around it, and this is rather an interaction. So I could say like this.
Wenjie, what do you think is a sense that probably we Chinese, having been working so hard, having paid so much attention to making money, supporting our family, and accumulating our wealth, what is this cultural horticultural expo potentially useful to us, or not useful to us in a way?
I think the useful way is that they educate the children from this very young age, that when they come to the expo, they know like what kind of flower it is, because we might tourists from schools. Their teachers invite them to the expo and ask them to write what they see in the expo. And I think this is more like you learn it from the nature, right? Like in the past, we didn't have such a good environment or like a place for people to know like so many kinds of plants. Especially for me, because I work in the expo this time, I work in the Botanic garden, then I start to know, wow, like the plants from the South America, and I know the plants from Vietnam, like everywhere, and I know why the plants like live or survive with different plants, with different insects. Yeah. So it's very direct way to learn it, especially it is good for students.
Okay. That's it for this edition of The Point with me, Liu Xin. As always, you can follow me on Facebook and Twitter using the handle The Point with LX. Download the application called CGTN to watch the show on your mobile devices, or go to YouTube and look for CGTN The Point. Thanks for watching. You've got The Point.